right. So in tonight's kickoff, we're going to discuss Hal Draper's article, Why the Working Class, as well as a little bit of Molyneux's article, What is the Real Marxist Tradition, each of which dive further into Marx and Engels' theory, which show us how the working class is the only class with the revolutionary potential capable of achieving a classist society. But first, we'll take a look at a few common critiques, such as the idealization of workers, along with the thought that believing a communist society is an inevitable step in our society's evolution, kind of along the lines of believing that workers' movements will just spontaneously bring about a communist society. We'll discuss that, what's so unique about the working class that makes it the only class with this revolutionary potential, contrast it with some of other classes, and additionally, we'll discuss the role of socialists within the working class. So there are several scholarly critiques of Marxism, and that's to be expected from capitalist institutions. But for tonight's purposes, I just want to go ahead and dispel two of those right off the bat. Scholars like to critique Marxism for thinking that socialism is somehow an inevitable and natural next step in the evolution of our society, I guess. And whenever, like, they like to say that since socialism hasn't just happened because they know capitalism is a failure, they like to use that as proof that socialism can never happen, right? And from all that we know about capitalism and its antagonistic nature, we as Marxists know for a fact that this is just false. We know that Marx and Engels wrote basically the exact opposite of this. There's nothing inevitable or like fated about socialism. Dialectics and historical materialism should not be confused with like destiny. And I don't really know how you can mistake those things, but it happens. On the contrary, capitalism is exactly what stands in our way, preventing our new and better communist world from becoming a reality. And we see it as our enemy combatant, which must be destroyed and replaced. Capitalism will never just wither away, even though it has well outlived its usefulness. And it's a step, and this is because the ruling class not only controls the productive forces, but it has hegemonic control over all the institutions and the societal relationships, which guarantees ruling class power. And this is done through both the state with its police forces and military and legal systems, but even more so through ideology. And what Marx and Engels did believe, what they did actually say, was that capitalism would result in a new class of workers that would grow in number, power, and consciousness. And they actually observed this happening in their lifetimes in the Industrial Revolution. So another critique that scholars have about Marxists is that we idealize workers in general. And that's kind of something I can understand, because I think often leftists in general do idealize workers and confuse the working class with they confuse the working class with individual workers. And I'm making a generalization here as well, but I do see this happen a lot, like on social media and just in general, basically. So this definitely calls for a further investigation through a socialist lens, because our position is often misunderstood and needs further clarification. So there's nothing inherently awesome inside of a worker that makes them a better person or impermeable to ridiculous or backwards beliefs or even like hateful ideology. And this is kind of goes on the line with like along side by side with identity politics as well. There's nothing, just like there's nothing in somebody's identity that automatically revolutionizes them or makes them revolutionary. Same thing with a worker. And when we do show up and intervene at actions and picket lines, First Fridays or whatever, this becomes like apparent. You'd better believe that the politics among working class people are all over the fucking place. And the same holds true for any other group of people. I mean, the ISO dissolved because not only because of like a rape, but because socialists try to cover up the rape, right? That's horrible. So we look to Draper's article to give us an explanation of the socialist position on the working class, because he says it way better than I could say it. So if we try to view social issues as merely conflicts between good people and bad people, then surely we must say that men who insist on starving others are bad. Is this tendency among employers because they are bad men? On the contrary, these employers are just as likely to be kind fathers, not the type to deliberately run over children in the street. They act as one way as individual atoms in the social fabric. They act quite another way as part of their class collectivity. They explain this when they do by saying, business is business. This is their way of distinguishing their individual human thoughts and role from their role as a member of the business community, that is, of their class. In the latter case, the conditions of existence and interests of business make out of them a social force that has little resemblance to their individual psychologies. Like every other class or group, the working class is more than the sum of its individual atoms. So, as I already pointed out, and Draper just emphasized in the article very clearly, in Marxism, class is not so much defined by your economic strata in society. Like if you've watched, I don't know, like the HBO, The Gilded Age or whatever, it's not like upper, middle, lower class, but it's defined as your social relationship to another class, depending on your material conditions and your common position with others in regards to property and the means of production. And according to Marxist theory, the relationship between classes has historically been contradictory and riddled with struggle and conflict. And it's that conflict between the classes that is the key characteristic of classes under Marxism, which is different from like other sectors of sociological studies of class, right? And with that being said, there's also nothing inherently socialist about workers. But just like no one like eats sugar or like flour by itself on its own, we have to like look at the aggregate. We have to look at the entire cake. So let's look at why Marx and Engels thought the working class was so goddamn special. In fact, they wrote, of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a genuinely revolutionary class. And that's out of that cheeky little manifesto that they wrote, and you might have heard of it because it's a bestseller. So I'm going to break it down in like four little, like, I guess, four little key points. So why is it only the working class that is capable of creating revolution, I guess? So straight out of the manifesto is capitalism produces its own gravediggers. Capitalism, and this is, we say this because capitalism forces workers to organize and teaches them organization on the factory floors, production lines, and all the various workplaces. It teaches workers to subordinate their own individual needs to the needs of the group to get the job done with discipline and even militancy. Everything that all of my organization skills that I have, I didn't learn by being a Denver communist. I learned that shit from my first job at McDonald's to like every job that I've had to my current job, and I've brought it into this organization. And with militancy, like if you want to see somebody go home on a Friday early, you will see militancy. And all of this stuff leads to solidarity between workers. Number two, produced and organized by capitalism and exploited, alienated, and tormented by capitalism. This mutual enemy leads them to struggle against, guess what? Capitalism. So, and number three, the nature of the exploitation, alienation, and torment against the working class makes it inherently more militant. And this just kind of goes in line with, like, if you poke a snake enough times, it's fucking gonna strike back at you. And I know we've said that, like, there's nothing inherently inside of a worker that makes them more special or anything like that. But it's true. Like, if you poke, you step on a fire enough time, it's going to burn you. Same thing, same concept. And the fourth factor is the most important factor of them all. And it's what distinguishes them from all other classes. And that's the striking power. And I think this is more like, this is literal striking power, like the power to withhold your labor, but it goes with number three too, like striking power, like the power to fucking strike, like hit something with a baseball bat, like masses of people. Workers control everything in society. Like, they control the economy. They have the ability to shut it down. There's no other class that holds this unique position. Capitalists have money or whatever. They have investment power. They own the property, whatever. But that's completely useless without the electricity, without the water, the gas, the transportation systems. Capitalists are useless without their administrative assistants, their servants. Without all of that, it's just completely useless. All right. So for emphasis, we go back to Draper again. And this quote is very powerful to me. So, the social power of the class depends not only on its numbers, it depends also on its homogeneity and organizability. As we have discussed, its striking power. It also depends on the indispensability of the services which it performs in keeping society's work going. No other class has its hands so closely on the basic work without which the system grinds to a halt. Not a wheel can turn without them. No other class can precipitate a social crisis by the deliberate decision of its organized cadres, as in a large-scale strike. When the working class goes into battle, all of society is embroiled, for all depends on it. Every time the working class stirs, the rest of society quivers. Yet there is debate over its special role. What other group is able to both shut down society and then keep society running after the defeat of the ruling class? So I think it's important to remember that Marxist theory not only centralizes on working class struggle and the revolution, but it also depends and plans upon our win of that revolution and are able to our ability to put the working class in control. All right. So, for example, just to compare these things, the peasantry or agrarian workers in the global South and non-industrialized nations cannot be a substitute for the working class, such as suggested in theories such as third world nationalism or Maoism or any other of those isms. In most industrialized nations, the peasantry or agrarian workforce, they've been replaced as a class entirely, some becoming landowners, wage laborers, and capitalist farmers, and therefore they've been absorbed into the working class or middle class or even capitalist class. Marx and Engels predicted that this class would decrease in composition with the rise of industrialization, but in areas that are not as industrialized, agrarian workers still exist in large numbers and they produce a lot and they account for a lot of the population. But if you juxtapose the four factors that I just described against the peasantry or agrarian workforce or any of the other non-major classes like the landlords or the middle class, neither of which are major classes, and there's just little to no revolutionary potential. In countries with large agrarian production, these workers are largely isolated from each other. They're isolated from the urban centers or the other places of production, because I realize not all production happens in the urban center. And so these workers are not compelled into organizing for any mutual interest in a centralized space. And there's not really any solidarity being formed. They don't have the strike power to shut down society or to run it. In other words, we would say that there's not much potential for self-emancipation. And the problem with that is that subsequently, that leaves a vacuum for some other force to lead these people from above, like guerrillas or a bureaucracy. And so then we're back to socialism from above, I guess, and detached idealism pressed upon a group of people from above with no regard to composition of these people, history, trying to force a revolution. And that sounds cool. Why haven't we tried that before for like the past 1,000 years? And also, I think the biggest issue with third worldism, whatever, I don't know, is it's anti-scientific and revisionist claims that there are no exploited groups in the largely industrialized world, or white exploited groups in the industrialized world, and failing to analyze class on a material basis. And it negates the fact that the struggle to end all struggles is that of the working class against the capitalist class, and it subordinates that falsely to the fight of a third world against the first world. And that kind of kills the struggle in favor of nationalism. And so basically the first world has no working class and the third world has no capitalist class, is what it's assuming, which is empirically false. And it recklessly negates the revolutionary potential of the united international working class, which unnecessarily divides us and pens us against each other, which is not only just a bad strategy, it's an inherently bourgeois strategy. So we support the struggle for liberation of oppressed nations, whether it's against colonialism or imperialism, and we don't deny the existence of either one of those, or that exploitation and oppression is relative, but the nation state exists only to uphold capitalism, and for Marxist, national liberation is a means to clear away national oppression, because it stands in the way of international working class solidarity. And from Molyneux's piece, shut up, Zelda. It is therefore a struggle in which the proletariat must retain its class independence in order to carry the revolution beyond the social and national resting place with which the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie will be content in a process of permanent revolution. So what is our role as communists, and what is our relationship to the working class? Is our goal to recruit every worker into socialism? From what we've already gone over, we know that the workers are the only true class when organized, or only a true class when organized in opposition to the capitalist class. So working class organization is and should always be our primary goal. But this is straight up from the manifesto. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the lines of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletariat movement. So our interests are aligned with that of the working class as a whole, always. We're not opportunists, sectarians, or revisionists, and we do not seek to create principles that would reflect this, as opposed to Stalinists, the DSA, and all those others. Our goal is to increase working class consciousness by intervention, building cadres, and building workers' parties, the overthrow of capitalist power, and to install working class rule. And I end with that. Thank you.